The morning had started like any other in our quiet town of Bath. The birds were singing, the air carried the scent of fresh lavender from the garden, and Edward had just left for work with a kiss to my forehead and a gentle hand on my pregnant belly. 8 months along, I should have been glowing with anticipation. Instead, I felt an uneasy flutter that had nothing to do with the baby. It had been building for weeks. Whispers in the air. A tension in Edward's voice when certain calls came in. A strange protectiveness that felt less like love, and more like control. I tried to dismiss it. He had been so attentive lately. Fussing over vitamins. Rubbing my back at night. Speaking to our unborn daughter as though she could already understand his every word. But that morning, something changed. I was looking for my phone charger when I noticed his mobile, left unlocked on the bed. It lit up with a new message. A name I had never seen before. Isabel Hartley. The preview of the message stopped my heart. Oliver's condition has worsened. The doctors say we cannot wait much longer. Are you sure Elena's child will be a match? I stood frozen, the walls around me closing in. I tapped the screen with trembling fingers. His most frequent contact. Hundreds of messages. Affection. Regret. Plans. You said the child's due in July. That gives us just enough time. I dropped the phone. The room blurred as I gripped the edge of the dresser to steady myself. My hands trembled violently. I stumbled into the bathroom and collapsed to the floor. It was not just nausea anymore. It was betrayal. Edward had a child. A secret child. A son who needed a heart transplant. And he intended to take mine. Not me. Not my baby. Never. I should have screamed. Thrown things. Called someone. Instead, I laughed. A hollow, bitter sound that didn't feel like it belonged to me. That evening, he returned home with dinner and roses. Told me I looked tired. That I should rest. I smiled. Nodded. Gave him tea and asked about his day. He never noticed the way I clutched the table behind me. The way I scanned his every movement like I was memorizing a stranger. When he kissed me goodnight, I whispered softly, "Sleep well." Because I had plans. That night, I waited until his breathing evened out. His sleep was usually light. But tonight, he was deeper than usual. I had made sure of it. His phone was exactly where I left it. The messages still open. I scrolled past confessions of love and whispers of longing, until I found the truth. David just needs to make it through this year. Elena's baby will be born just in time. David? No. Oliver. He even lied to Isabel about the name. I stared into the mirror, my reflection pale and shaking. How long had he been planning this? Had anything been real? Suddenly, a small kick nudged my ribs. Our baby. A whisper of life. No. I would not let her be taken. But this was no ordinary betrayal. Edward was not just a cheating husband. He was a calculated liar. And he was deeply entangled in the Spencer family legacy. If I was going to survive this, I had to be smart. I couldn't just run. I had to outplay them. And I had to start with the only person who would believe me. Charlotte. Charlotte Bell had been my closest friend since our school days in Somerset. We had grown up sharing secrets, heartbreaks, and dreams over cups of tea and under shared umbrellas. But since marrying Edward and moving into the Spencer estate in Bath, I had slowly drifted from her orbit, kept at bay by Edward's subtle discouragements. He had always said she was too involved, too emotional. Now, as I stood in front of her quaint bookshop in a rainy corner of Bristol, I realized how much I needed her. She looked up from behind the till, her eyes widening when she saw me. Elena? Good heavens, are you all right? I shook my head. She locked the register without another word and guided me upstairs to the flat above the shop. It was warm and smelled of cinnamon and old paper. "I'm going to make you a cup of proper tea. Then you're going to tell me everything." And I did. Every word. Every message. Every plan. When I finished, there was silence. Charlotte stared at the mug in her hand as though it might explain the madness. Finally, she whispered, "He was going to kill your child." Tears slipped down my cheeks. "I don't think he sees it that way. He thinks he's saving someone." Charlotte stood abruptly. "That's madness, Elena. This isn't a donation. It's murder." "I know. We have to go to the police." I hesitated. "There's no solid proof. No direct admission. They'll just say I'm hysterical." Charlotte narrowed her eyes. "Then we go deeper. We find something they can't deny." That night, I returned to the Spencer estate with my heart pounding and a plan forming. Charlotte would help from the outside. I'd stay inside, play the part of the obedient wife, and uncover the truth. What I didn't expect was to find Edward already waiting for me in the sitting room, drink in hand. "You were out a long time," he said, voice smooth as ever. "I went for a walk. Needed air." "Funny. Your coat is dry." My pulse quickened. He studied me. Then smiled. "You know, I've been thinking. Perhaps we should go away before the baby comes. Somewhere quiet. Germany, maybe." He was accelerating the plan. I forced a smile. "That sounds nice." That night, I lay awake beside him, unable to sleep. Outside, a storm was brewing. Rain lashed the windows. I could feel my baby shift, restless, as though she sensed my fear. Suddenly, I remembered something that didn't quite fit. One of the messages from Isabel mentioned a name. Not just Oliver, but someone else. "Diana is pushing for the surgery. She says we cannot delay." "Diana?" I didn't know a Diana. I sat up slowly in bed, heart thudding. There was another player in this game. Someone else pulling strings. And if Diana was involved, this went far beyond Edward. I needed more than just Charlotte's help. I needed someone on the inside. Someone who could get me medical answers. Someone like Daniel. Daniel Whitaker was not only one of the finest pediatric cardiologists in London, he was also my old university friend. We had once shared lecture halls, sleepless study nights, and even a brief, awkward kiss that we both pretended never happened. Since then, we'd grown distant, life pulling us in different directions. But I knew one thing for certain, Daniel had never lied to me. I waited for him outside St. George's Hospital, wrapped in a scarf and oversized coat, trying to mask both my baby bump and my panic. When he finally emerged through the sliding doors, still in his scrubs, he froze at the sight of me. "Elena," he said cautiously. "What are you doing here?" "I need your help," I whispered. We sat in his car, the heater humming, rain tapping gently on the roof. I told him everything, about Edward, the messages, the child named Oliver, and the mystery woman Diana. Daniel listened without interrupting, his expression slowly shifting from disbelief to alarm. "You think they're planning to harvest your baby's heart?" he asked. I nodded, tears burning at the corners of my eyes. "I know how it sounds." He ran a hand through his hair. "It sounds insane, Elena. But I've seen families do desperate things." I reached into my bag and pulled out a printed message. The one where Isabel wrote, "Oliver is deteriorating. Diana says it's either this or nothing." He took it from me, scanned it, and frowned. "Diana Kingswell." I looked up. "You know her. She's not just a woman. She's the head of pediatric transplants for all of South England. Ruthless. Brilliant. She's had scandals, but they always disappear quietly. The car suddenly felt colder. If she's involved, Daniel continued, it means someone is protecting this. Someone very high. I'm scared, Daniel. You should be. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his glove compartment and pulled out a keycard. This gets you into the archives wing at night. There's a digital database of all upcoming transplant procedures. It won't say everything outright, but if Oliver Spencer's name is there, and there's a matching donor ID that appears post-July, we'll know. My voice shook. What if I'm right? He stared at me, grave. Then your baby is in more danger than you realize. Later that night, I sat alone in my car outside the Spencer estate, gripping the keycard and shaking. I was now part of something far darker than I could have imagined. Not just lies or betrayal, this was an entire system. Protected by power. Fueled by desperation. And it would take more than proof to stop them. It would take a risk. The next day, I returned to the hospital. Not as a patient, but as a thief. St. George's Hospital stood quietly under the midnight rain, its sterile corridors asleep in pale fluorescent light. I moved like a shadow, dressed in Daniel's old security pass jacket, my heart beating loud enough to echo through the walls. I had memorized the route from Daniel's directions, down the west lift, second floor, follow the green line past the staff lounge, then left to the archive wing. My fingers trembled as I swiped the keycard. The lock clicked open. The archive wing was cold, filled with silent terminals and locked drawers. Daniel had told me what to look for: donor registry logs, incoming transplant schedules, and the internal code that matched Edward's child. Oliver Spencer. I sat before one of the terminals, heart thundering. My fingers hovered over the keyboard before I typed. Spencer, Oliver. Age, 6. Blood type, AB negative. Status, urgent. Organ required, heart. My throat went dry. Then I typed again. Donor schedule. Estimated match, July 17th. Donor ID, 2431, BS. I swallowed hard. I opened the confidential medical entry tied to that donor ID. What I saw stopped my heart. Donor ID, 2431, BS. Status, pending maternal delivery. Location, private, Spencer Estate, Bath. Match grade, perfect compatibility with recipient 067 SP, Oliver Spencer. Consent, prearranged. Priority override signed by D. Kingswell. I couldn't breathe. The system didn't name me directly, but the location, the donor status, the matching, it was undeniable. I was the donor. My child was 2431, BS. My daughter was already registered. Already spoken for. I sat back in the chair, frozen, tears slipping silently down my cheeks. This wasn't a conspiracy of desperation anymore. This was methodical. Documented. Institutional. Someone cleared their throat behind me. I turned. A woman stood in the doorway. Tall, severe, her dark coat damp from the rain. Sharp eyes behind gold-rimmed glasses. Mrs. Spencer, she said coldly. You shouldn't be here. My mouth went dry. Diana Kingswell. She smiled thinly. I had a feeling curiosity might drive you here. My hands tightened into fists. How could you? She's not even born. She stepped into the room, voice calm. That's precisely why. She will not suffer. She will never know pain. But Oliver is suffering every moment he breathes. She is my baby. And Oliver is someone's baby, too. The room swirled. My rage, my fear, my helplessness. Diana's voice dropped. You should have stayed in the dark. Now you've made things very complicated. She turned and walked away. And I knew. They wouldn't wait until July. They would move now. And I had to disappear, before they could get to my child first. The next morning, I didn't return to the Spencer estate. I didn't go home, didn't call Edward, didn't pack a bag. I ran. By sunrise, I was in a borrowed car, driving west through the countryside, my hands white against the steering wheel. The quiet hills of Somerset rolled by like a dream I wasn't part of anymore. In the passenger seat lay my phone, powered off. I had smashed their SIM card to bits. I wasn't just hiding. I was vanishing. I knew they would come looking. They had resources, surveillance, influence. I didn't know how many doctors were involved, or how high the corruption reached, but I couldn't risk staying another day in Edward's world. Not when they had already written my baby into a ledger like a number. I ended up at a coastal town in Cornwall. Windy, forgotten, filled with old fishermen and the smell of salt. I found a room above a tiny bookshop where the landlady asked no questions. I told her I was a writer looking for peace. She gave me a set of keys and a kettle and left me alone. There, in that dusty room with creaky floorboards and a broken window latch, I waited. For weeks, I lived like a ghost. I walked by the cliffs in silence, always with one hand on my belly. My baby kicked more now, soft taps, then stronger ones. She was growing. And so was my fear. I didn't know what their next move would be. But then, it came. One grey afternoon, as I returned from the shops, I found someone waiting by the door. Daniel. He looked exhausted, his hair damp, his eyes darting to the street behind him. "How did you find me?" I asked in disbelief. He didn't answer. Just stepped inside, shut the door, and turned to me with a grave expression. "You need to listen carefully." He handed me a folded document. I opened it. It was a court summons. In the matter of guardianship and medical welfare of unborn minor, petitioned by Edward Spencer. My legs almost gave way. "He's trying to claim legal authority over your child," Daniel said. "He's arguing that you've become mentally unwell and a danger to the baby's health." I sank into the armchair, shaking. "They want to institutionalize you, Elena. That gives them full medical control. Once that happens, they can induce labor. Take her." Daniel nodded. Tears blurred my vision. "There's more," he said softly. "Diana's filed an emergency medical motion. They've backdated a consent form, with your forged signature. They're preparing for surgery." I looked at him in horror. "When?" "They're calling it within 72 hours. I stood abruptly. "Then I need to leave. The country. Tonight." Daniel hesitated. "There's a boat. A small one. Belongs to an old friend of mine who owes me a favor. It won't be luxurious, but it'll get you to Ireland. From there, you can disappear." I looked down at my belly. My daughter was kicking again. I placed my hands protectively over her and nodded. "I'll go." Outside, the wind howled and the sea roared against the cliffs. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. I was going to save my child, even if I had to tear down the world to do it. The forest was silent but alive. Branches creaked overhead, and the wind whispered secrets between the trees. Grace moved swiftly, guiding me along a path that barely existed, her torch cutting a thin line through the darkness. I followed, exhausted and breathless. Every step sent pain shooting through my back and thighs. The baby shifted heavily inside me, reminding me she too was clinging to survival. We reached a small cottage tucked into the hillside, half hidden by ivy, its stone walls blending into the landscape. Grace unlocked the door, and the warmth inside hit me like a memory I couldn't place. A fire already crackled in the hearth. "You'll be safe here," she said, locking the door behind us. I collapsed into a chair. For how long? She looked at me with something between pity and admiration. Long enough to bring her into the world. After that, well, we'll cross that bridge when it comes. I wanted to ask more, but I couldn't. My eyes were closing. The exhaustion of the last 3 days dragged me into a dreamless sleep. When I woke, daylight filtered through lace curtains. I was wrapped in a knitted blanket, and someone had placed a glass of water beside me. I felt calmer for the first time in days. Grace sat at the table with a newspaper, but she wasn't reading it, she was watching me. They put out a report, she said quietly. You're missing. But they're not telling the whole story. I sat up, alarmed. What are they saying? She slid the paper across the table. Heiress vanishes weeks before due date. Family cites mental health concerns. I read the article. Cold rage spread through my chest. They're painting me as unstable, I whispered. Like I just ran off in a panic. That's how they'll justify whatever comes next, Grace said. If they find you, anything they do will look like a rescue. I gripped the edge of the table. I have to get this story out, I said. The real story. Grace nodded. Then you'll need to be smart. And you'll need help. As if on cue, the door creaked open. Daniel stepped inside, drenched from rain. You said you had a plan, I breathed. He nodded, eyes shadowed with worry. We go public. But not with you. With evidence. With names. With the files you found. But they'll trace it back to me. Not if we're careful. We'll leak the data to a journalist in London. I know someone who won't back down. My heartbeat quickened. And once it's out, they won't be able to touch you. Not without the world watching. It was a dangerous hope, but it was the only one I had. I looked to Grace. She was already packing a satchel. We leave at nightfall, she said. And we don't look back. The night was cold and wet, with mist curling like smoke through the trees as we left the cottage. Grace led the way with a lantern, her steps sure and quick. Daniel walked beside me, carrying the satchel full of evidence we'd collected, contracts, emails, surveillance stills. Proof of what Diana and her network had done. My heart pounded with each step, not just from the effort of walking in my condition, but from the weight of what we were about to do. Once the files were sent, there would be no turning back. Diana would know I had exposed her. And she would retaliate. We reached the edge of a village just before midnight. Daniel guided us to a disused railway building on the outskirts, his contact's makeshift newsroom. Inside, it smelled of damp paper and black coffee. A woman sat at a desk surrounded by screens and cables. Her name was Sophie. You've got 15 minutes, she said sharply. Then I wipe everything. Daniel handed her the drive. This is the full archive. Names, dates, bank transfers, recorded calls. Everything. Sophie inserted the drive and scrolled through the folders, her eyes narrowing. This is real, she said. I stepped forward. They've been using children. Vulnerable women. They covered up deaths. Paid off authorities. Sophie looked up at me. And what happens to you if I run this? They'll come for me, I replied. But they're already hunting me. At least if the world knows, they'll have to hide. Sophie didn't smile. She simply turned back to the screen and began uploading. The next hour was a blur. Sophie prepared the files for distribution, anonymous email dumps, timed press releases, coded tags to ensure the story hit multiple media outlets at once. By dawn, it was done. We need to move, Daniel said. Now. We slipped out the back just as Sophie's building went dark. I didn't speak. I couldn't. The weight of it all was pressing down on me, every risk, every lie I had lived, every moment I'd doubted myself. Now the truth was out there. But would it be enough? We drove to a safe house in Derbyshire, far from the estate, the hospitals, the city. A stone cottage that belonged to one of Grace's oldest friends. I slept for hours, waking only to eat and check that the baby was still moving. Then, 3 days later, it happened. The news broke. I watched from the edge of a dusty sofa as the presenter's voice echoed from the old television. New evidence has emerged linking Diana Spencer, of the renowned Spencer family, to an underground child trafficking network operating across multiple counties. Authorities have opened an official investigation. My breath caught. I looked to Daniel. He didn't speak, but his eyes were filled with fierce relief. Then came the knock at the door. Not rushed. Not panicked. Just deliberate. Grace stood and peered through the curtain. She went pale. I reached for her hand. "Who is it?" I whispered. Her voice trembled. "It's your father." The knock came again. Slower this time. More deliberate. Grace turned to me, her face stricken. "He's alone," she whispered. "No black cars. No men in suits. Just him." Daniel moved towards the window but I stopped him. "I'll open it," I said. My hand trembled as I unlocked the door. The old wood creaked as it swung open. And there he was, Edward Spencer. My father. The man who had once carried me on his shoulders through fields of lavender. The man who had looked away as his wife orchestrated cruelty from behind crystal goblets. He looked older. Smaller somehow. His eyes searched my face with something dangerously close to sorrow. "May I come in?" he asked softly. I hesitated, then stepped aside. He entered slowly, removing his coat. Grace kept near the hearth, arms folded, ready to intervene. Daniel stayed beside me, protective. "I saw the news," my father began, voice hoarse. "And I knew where you'd be." I didn't reply. He looked down at his hands. "I'm not here to drag you back. I'm not even here to defend her. Diana's empire was more rotten than I allowed myself to see." I studied his face. "You knew." He nodded. "Not everything. Not the children. But enough to suspect. And I did nothing." The silence was louder than anything he could have said. "Why now?" I asked. "Why come here?" He exhaled. "Because you're not safe. Exposing her, exposing them, won't end this. There are others. And they won't rest just because the press has seen the truth." Daniel stepped forward. "Are you threatening her?" My father raised a hand. "No. I'm warning you. And I'm offering something." He reached into his coat and pulled out a black folder. "I kept this. Hidden. For years. It names people far more powerful than your mother. Politicians. Foreign donors. CEOs. If you release this, it will collapse everything. But it also means..." He stopped. "It means we'll never see each other again," I finished. He nodded. I took the folder in my hands. It was heavier than it looked. Grace whispered, "It's enough to bring down half the aristocracy." "I know," I said. "And that's why I have to do it." I turned back to my father. "Why give this to me?" He paused, then answered quietly. "Because despite everything, I still remember who you were as a little girl. And I see that fire in you again now. Maybe I want to believe there's still a future worth protecting." He moved towards the door, then looked back once more. "Take care of her," he said to Daniel, nodding to my stomach. She'll change more than you know. And then he left. Without another word. The room was still. Daniel wrapped his arms around me. I clutched the folder tight to my chest. Grace stoked the fire. The world outside would soon shift. I had shattered the silence. And now, the reckoning would begin.